Hello dear friends. This video is about Vimshottari Dasha. Soon we will start a course on predicting in Vedic astrology, and we will of course analyze in detail Vimshottari Dasha and Vimshottari Dasha in combination with transits. These are the topics which will be discussed in our first module. Then we will consider the techniques of Jaimini and sign dashas and look at Muhurta. If you want more details about this course, you can look under this video. There will be a link to the detailed description and the topics that we are going to go through. And if you watch this video after, then you can still take this course and take it recorded, but in the same interactive way as other students. The course always has a curator, homework, and feedback. And now I would like to talk about Vimshottari Dasha from a slightly different angle, not as you have heard about it before. Vimshottari Dasha is a very popular tool. In fact, every person who practices Vedic astrology is familiar with this tool. Even if you study astrology at an amateur level, then you also know that each person lives through certain periods. Why is this periodization system so popular and what is the point? In fact, most astrologers use Vimshottari Dasha mechanically, and when questions arise why something did not work, why it does not always work, it is because the seed of this dasha was not understood properly. In general, there are many systems of periodization of various states in Vedic astrology that unfold in time. If you open any professional software, you will see there about 20 or at least 10 ways to predict a person's life. But each dasha must have a key to reading. And there are dashas that depend on a specific chart, that is, depend on the positions of the planets in this chart. It can be called conditional dashas, or dashas which contain a certain condition, and if it is in a person's chart, then we apply this periodization. If not, then we do not apply it. And Vimshottari Dasha is the most universal, the most classical technique of the periodization of a person's life. Unless we also consider the Naisargika Dasha. This is a natural periodization of a person's growing up and the development of his brain. It also exists in Vedic astrology. These are natural periods that each person lives, regardless of his chart. Here, nevertheless, we use the natal chart for prediction. And I would like to tell you about this very seed. Why does Vimshottari Dasha work, and in what cases it can fail? In what cases you seem to expect one thing and get another, and on what it all depends. Vimshottari Dasha is a nakshatra dasha, which means that we study the mind of a person, his deep layers of consciousness. And this is exactly how Vedic astrology differs from Western astrology. Vedic astrology is built on yoga, ancient treatises in which the rules for the work of the brain or the rules of the work of the consciousness are written, and the conditions that are necessary for us to improve spiritually are described in the Vedic treatises. And Vimshottari Dasha is just about this. It is about how the mind of a person or manas is arranged. And before we predict generally, we must understand why there is such a periodization, such a sequence of period, why one period is 7 years, another period is 20 years, and what it depends on. Have you ever heard of this? Have your astrology teachers have ever explained this to you? Most likely they haven't, because in fact, no one knows this. Such a periodization was recorded in classical works, and it is carried over from generation to generation by astrologers. And why is Vimshottari Dasha so loved by astrologers? Because it works. And this is exactly what makes Vimshottari Dasha so attractive, because people really feel when their periods change. And in predictions, it really works if we apply it correctly. But these moments, which are related to why the Sun is 6 years and Mars is 7 years, why the Ketu period comes first, if we look from the Ashwini nakshatra, and how all this is organized, it is not clear. And in this video, I will try to deviate this topic a little bit, but these are, of course, my personal reflections as a practicing astrologer and as a person who uses Vimshottari Dasha every day. And I believe that if we think logically, if we layer by layer discover the basic concepts of astrology, then we will be able to explain to ourselves all the techniques sooner or later, if we think, practice and understand where it all comes from. And now I will try to explain how Vimshottari Dasha works. Vimshottari Dasha literally means 120. And we have 120 years of life to live all its periods, and only 9 planetary periods. But where does it all come from? Firstly, it must be said that the lunar zodiac of 27 nakshatras is the heart of the Vimshottari Dasha. And first we need to understand how it works and what it is. The 27 nakshatras are an ancient zodiac. It is much older than the zodiac that we see and which we see in a natal chart, the solar zodiac of 12 signs, of 12 zodiac constellations. But these 27 nakshatras relate to the work of manas, or person's mind. And if we look from the point of view of neurophysiology, then the work of these 27 nakshatras is projected onto the brainstem of a person. The brainstem is the formation that tells the basal ganglia and the entire brain, the integral system, what state we're currently experiencing. Various states of the psyche are modulated there through bundles of monoaminergic neurons. But here, I wouldn't want to speak in such scary terms, but in simple words, we have an ancient brain, and in this ancient brain, chemical reactions occur that modulate our mental states. And you probably know 3 ways of forming a state of mind. This is the path of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. And 27 nakshatras, as we know, are divided into divine, human, and demonic. Or in other words, Deva nakshatras, Manusha nakshatras, and Rakshasa nakshatras, if you could come across these terms. This cycle of 27 nakshatras is about how our consciousness works from the point of view of the ancient, primitive, archaic brain, and you do not really choose what you feel. And Vimshottari Dasha is about these states which we feel from ancient times. which we experience as biological animal beings, shows how it transformed into an integral plane of consciousness. And we see the integral plane of consciousness already in the natal chart, which consists of 12 houses where we have Lagna, Lagnesh and 9 planets which conduct these states, deep states, the integral plane. You can say in another way, you can look at it through the theory of yoga. We have manas, and manas is just that very primitive mind that constantly experiences something. Something is constantly overflowing in it. Samskaras are teeming there. Samskara is an impression that, one might say, has existed there since primordial times. It always exists there, it was recorded there, and it has a wide variety of states. Samskaras are divided into dormant, sleeping, active and semi-active. This is a very complex structure, and in fact, these samskaras are the reason for us to appear here. And it leads a person to birth in a certain place at a certain time. And according to the nakshatra of the moon, we can see the predominant samskara in the mind of a person, as a result of which he came here to earth. And here the most interesting thing begins. Here from natal moon starts the process of activating of samskaras in the human mind. There are various yogic techniques to pacify these samskaras. Samskaras are opposed to pure mind called buddhi. This is rationality. This is what makes us human, the higher beings, and this is what allows us to be here and now without ancient, archaic animal instincts that are included in manas. In manas, in this area of consciousness, the whole history of a person is recorded. One might even say, not a person, but that being who comes here to receive experience. And the sequence of nakshatras, this is exactly the sequence of the inclusion of a wide variety of samskaras. And if you want to deeply understand Vimshottari Dasha, you must first study nakshatras. You need to understand all classifications within nakshatras. Why some are divine, why others are demonic. If we speak in the language of neurophysiology, why some of them are serotonin, other dopamine, third norepinephrine. And what states each nakshatra forms in the human mind. And if we are talking about rulers of nakshatras, they just bring these states into our consciousness, and these rulers organize the situation for us. Why do we need a situation? In order to purify samskaras, purify through a certain samskara and replace, for example, a negative samskara with a positive one. There are techniques, a variety of techniques. I do not know it, I do not teach it, but theoretically they exist in yoga practice in order to either calm down these samskaras, these impressions, or replace them with more positive ones. And if we have come here to this life, it means that we don't have such a pure consciousness. We are not ready to stop to evoke earthy situations through samskaras. We are affected by samskaras, and therefore we experience them through earthly plane. And Vimshottari Dasha is about how we ourselves organize the situations in life in order to bring the impression that has been embedded into us from the past to the realization. You can also say this: we do not choose what to feel. For example, the Saturn period turns on and you feel the emotion of sadness. This is modality. This is a state, or to use the correct language, it is called vasana. something that already gives us an attitude to things. It is not chosen by us, it is embedded according to the law of the development of Manas, and this law of the development of Manas is written in a circle of 27 nakshatras. This is an ancient law, and we are obliged to pass through ourselves these samskaras, these mental impressions. At first, these cause vrittis, vibrations in the mind, and after, they are transformed into vasana, into a certain affirmation of consciousness, and then consciousness claims that we are sad. And we know from the theory of neurophysiology that in general we do not choose anything. The brain decides everything for us and convinces us the second before we realize that we think it ourselves. In fact, everything goes automatically within us. One state is replacing another, and we actually are unable to control it in any way unless we reach some new level of awareness. Firstly, we accept the existence of these samskaras in our lives, and secondly, we understand clearly which situation corresponds to which ones, and why you, for example, have performed certain deed or made certain choice in a state of sadness, and in the modality I must, this is the modality of Saturn. If your consciousness switches to the Saturn modality, then you tend to make a completely different choice rather than when your consciousness is in the Jupiter modality. Astrologers know this, they use it, and thus they can predict situations for people. They just need to look at the function of Jupiter or Saturn in the chart of a person, in his consciousness, and then they can quite accurately predict the near future. How will change and where the person will go, and he will go through a certain situation because he will feel a certain emotion of being in a certain state. And probably we need to explain the word modality a little, because this is a philosophical term, it is also a linguistic term. Modality is when we are in a certain relation to reality. And we have 9 planets, 9 planetary periods, and we can say that a person in principle can have 9 modalities, 9 options for attitude to reality, and 9 options at what angle he perceives everything, and this perception strongly influences our decision. Modality, you may know this word from modal verbs in English or in any other language. These are the verbs that express not the action itself, but the speaker's attitude to reality. For example, I can, this is a modal verb, and in some grammars it takes a special place. Modal verbs change according to certain canons, or do not change at all, because these are special verbs. These are special words that describe not the actions but the relationship to actions or to reality. That is, they really form the reality of a person. And so, for example, when you are in a period of Mars, you can be in the modality of I can and I want to do. I can, I do, I move, and we have such words. And there is another modality, there is the modality I must, and these words must, I have to. There are a lot of such words in every language because Saturn is such a part of consciousness when we feel a limitation. When we experience such emotion as sadness, gloom and responsibility in the most positive way, and it is a state when I have to, I am obliged and I am forced, I have to. And by the way, in the English language, there are so many shades of obligation, that is, the Saturn is well developed in the minds of people. There is, for example, the modality I believe, and I believe this is also a modal verb, and you can guess with what period the state of consciousness is linked. This is the period of Jupiter. But let's continue. We said that in the Manas, such a phenomenon occurs, that is not entirely related to the mind, to our rational thinking. And we cannot understand why we feel this, why some mental impression prevails over us now. And what we need to do to bring into awareness what we feel. And so, I gradually lead us to the question of the sequence. In what sequence the grahas are assigned to these states? We have 9 grahas and 27 states, 27 nakshatras, 27 lunar mansions, and all nakshatras are, first of all, about the moon. Any nakshatra belongs to the moon first. It does not belong to any other planet. Another planet just assigned to it in order to bring this state of mind to the plane of the integral consciousness, in order to realize what it is, to somehow reveal what I feel, and follow this feeling into any situation in order to purify this samskara or replace it with a more positive one. And in what order rulers are attached to nakshatras? And we see that the first ruler is Ketu. Have you ever wondered why this is so? First Ketu, then Venus, then the Sun, then the Moon, then Mars, then Rahu, Rahu Ardra, then Jupiter, Punarvasu, then Saturn, Pushya, and then Mercury, Ashlesha. In principle, 27 is divided by 3, and we get such 3 clusters of 9 nakshatras. And then everything is sorted automatically after we have sorted the cluster of first 9. We assign to each nakshatra a certain graha, which will handle the request of manas, so it comes up to the surface of our consciousness and we have done something here. And why such a sequence? If we consider the fact that in this case we are talking about how the seeds of past impressions grow in a person's consciousness, then we will understand at least approximately this pattern. If everything starts with Ketu, then it means that everything starts from the past. This means that Ketu is a kind of a leading component of consciousness in this case. It means that through this level we connect with the most distant past of our mind, when we were still, maybe even in such a state when we were working out animal impulses. And our task is to bring everything to Mercury, and the nakshatras in the Gandanta, Revati, Ashwini, Anshlesha, Magha, Jyeshta, Mula. These nakshatras are in the junctions between Ketu and Mercury. That is, in fact, we start with Ketu and we end up with Mercury. If you look at the theory of yoga or the theory of karma, then we can roughly guess that first samskara comes from the past, then it is transformed into some conscious desire. It will already be the moon. It stands in the middle, and then all of this is brought to the plane of awareness. We can also somehow understand, voice out, comprehend this combination between Ketu and Mercury. In this case, we're talking about how we turn an impulse into something conscious and into something that can be voiced. The last stages are Mercurian stages. And here I will not dig deep into a specific sequence. I will only emphasize that Ketu is not accidentally the first graha that brings us the samskara to field of natal chart. And Ketu is similar to Mars. And we can actually divide this process of bringing the samskara into the level of awareness into two segments. The first segment is from Ketu to the Moon, and the second segment is from Mars to Mercury. And in this case, Ketu is like Mars, and period of Ketu will be 7 years, and Mars is 7 years. And this is just about the fact that first the unconscious is being brought into desire and then processed to pure consciousness. Comes to pure consciousness and samskara is purified. But this is just a theoretical assumption. I don't read this anywhere. I'm thinking about it out loud. But let's carry on. It gets even more interesting further down, because it is not clear where these differences in periods come from. Why one period lasts 7 years and the other lasts 20 years? And we figure this out. We can think about how long the different emotions last. It is clear that samskaras are included in particular sequence. Nakshatras determine this for us. Rulers give us the order of introducing samskaras into our consciousness. But why is there a difference in the length of time of how much we have to work with each samskara? And here I was prompted to make a decision by a thought that any emotion is special in terms of the duration of this emotion. We do not experience the same feelings or emotions or any states for the same amount of time. And then I began to look in the scientific literature for some confirmation of the fact that emotion is a mental state, an uncontrolled state, which lasts for a certain amount of time. And yes, there is such a research. It was carried out and is still being carried out by scientists from the Belgian and Dutch universities. I will discuss it more in the course if you want. I will give you links so you can look at this research, look at the results, and you will see that different emotions last for different amounts of time. And the researchers have found that the longest lasting emotion is sadness. The next comes hope, and the shortest emotion is shame. There is also fear, tenderness, and anger. Also refers to short-term emotions. And irritation refers to short-term emotions. This word, emotion, may not be entirely scientific, but the researchers describe it this way. They call this word emotion, and psychologists themselves do not always agree what emotion is, and what is the difference between this state, feeling and emotion. In this case, we mean a mental state that we ourselves cannot stop in any way. We have no control over it. And the longest state, from their point of view, is the emotion of sadness, gloom, grief, some kind of blues. And it lasts a long time. It does not depend on the situation that caused it. That is, if you're experiencing sadness, then the situation that could have caused it does not necessarily exist. And short-term emotions are usually experienced as a result of a certain situation, and they last for a short period of time. According to these experts, shame is the shortest emotion. And if we carry that over to our periods, what is shame? Shame is when you sharply merge with your center. That is, you understand that you have a certain moral code. For example, you went out into the street and there is something wrong with your clothes, or there are no clothes at all, and the person feels shame. It means that he connects with the sun. First of all, it is the sun. The sun is the shortest emotion. Sun is in charge of the shortest emotion, and this is the shortest dasha, 6 years. We also have two short dashas, Mars and Ketu, for 7 years. And in principle, if we look at emotions from this point of view, we can see a correlation. It correlates with the research that I got my hands on, with what we see from the periods of the Vimshottari Dasha. This is too maybe the key to explaining why Saturn period is 19 years, Venus is 20 years, and the Sun is only 6 years. And if you feel that the situation, a certain moral principle is violated, you sharply connect with your center and you have a sharp feeling of shame, and as soon as the situation passes, you have no feeling of shame anymore. Of course, it can transform into anxiety and a feeling of guilt in a further transformation, but there is no this sharp feeling. The Sun is a punitive aspect. The Sun is this thalamus, and the thalamus will never hold any emotion for very long. In fact, it filters out all these unnecessary signals from the basal ganglia, from the cerebral cortex, and it can be called an information funnel. Therefore, the period of the Sun is a period when you must be in touch with your center. Cut to the chase, do not experience some kind of emotion for a long time, but quickly mobilize and come to your essence. There will certainly be some punitive aspects during the period of the Sun. If suddenly moral principles were violated, then it immediately comes to the realization. Immediately something happens. Some predict when the Sun is weak in the chart, or if the Sun is severely afflicted, the period of the Sun may be associated with problems that come from the state. And if there is some combination with the 12th house or even Saturn, then it may be associated with imprisonment. This is precisely the effect that the emotion that person experienced through the period of the Sun. Firstly, it is short-term. It is associated with the fact that we have to put ourselves in the center and somehow merge with this center. The state, the father, king, some kind of punitive structures. All this can happen in our life during the period of the Sun, depending on its position in the horoscope. There are many nuances, but the point is that this is short-term. The same goes with Mars. Of course, Mars is not the best friend of the Moon in the sense of keeping emotion for a long time. Mars quickly wears out emotion. This is anger, irritation, and if you are angry for 20 years, then you will simply collapse. This is not an emotion that can be experienced for the very long time. But Venus is a better friend of the Moon. And if you look at the Vimshottari Dasha, the first thing that catches the eye would be the fact that we have 120 years of life, and we have 12 signs of zodiac, the 12 houses. But why don't we just simplify everything? 10 years for each house, for each sign, and divide life of these 120 years like that? But no, because this periodization is based on the Moon. And this periodization is based on the needs of the Moon, the needs of Manas. And you can notice that it is the Moon that is ranked as a dozen in the Vimshottari Dasha, exactly 10 years, associated with the period of the Moon. The Moon occupies one sign, the sign of Cancer. and it has a value of 10. This is just about the fact that the moon stands here at the very top. The moon is the most basic component of Vimshottari Dasha. And then we can look at how the planets combine with the moon, how long they can keep an emotion. And if we look at Venus, we see that Venus correlates with things that are associated with lunar processes. Venus is also emotions. And like the moon, it is dopamine, main neurotransmitter. And if we look at the hypothalamus, then we know that the moon is associated with hypothalamus. We can see that the place where dopamine neurons are located, and this place is the hypothalamus. And the second place where we can find many dopamine pathways and many things that are related to pleasure, a demonic aspect, is a substantia nigra. This is an area of the basal ganglia that is associated with Venus. In order to be completely correct and honest, I must also mention the ventral tegmental area. It is also associated with Venus, but this can also be attributed to the area of the substantia nigra. The maximum number of these processes also happens there. And what does it mean? This suggests that the moon and Venus are actually in the same team in terms of bringing emotions to those samskaras that lie in the depth of our consciousness and ask to come out into our lives. And therefore, Venus period takes 20 years. But why 20? Why not 10? Because Venus rules 2 signs, and if we put 10 in each sign, we get 20. And another very important fact, purely astrological, is the sign of Venus. The moon is exalted. And it is exalted in that dopamine nakshatra, Kritika. All these details we study in our nakshatra courses, and maybe now I may sound very strange, but we study all these correlations because astrology is about the thinking process. It is about neurophysiology. And if you do not know how the brain and how the consciousness work, then it is not really astrology. You need to dig deeper. If you are predicting something for a person, it means that you are revealing to him the structure of his consciousness. And this structure of consciousness is based on processes inside the brain. Of course, consciousness is more about neurophysiology, but neurophysiology reflects consciousness. This is something that you can really feel, read in literature and somehow speak about in order to be in the stream of science and not just think and draw some conclusions which are not backed up by anything. So in this case, we can take the moon and Venus as 2 grahas, which act on the same field, and that is why the period of Venus is so long, the longest in Vimshottari Dasha. And if we look at each planet exactly from this angle, if we consider how long this planet allows the moon to hold emotion, then we can see that if it is the sun, then this is the suppression of everything connected with the emotional process. Of course, in this case, these are the 2 luminaries. They act at the same time, but from different sides. And the thalamus is what is associated with solar activity as a punitive function, integral, and not so many years should be given to this period. The same with Mars. Rahu and Ketu are generally here only to supplement the system to 9. These grahas do not own any signs, they can only be the co-rulers. Therefore, there is a rule that you all know. Ketu is like Mars and Rahu is like Saturn. And in this way, you easily find the number of years for Rahu and Ketu because they reflect different processes. And if Ketu brings samskaras from the past to the plane of awareness very quickly and impulsively, then during the Rahu period it is happening according to Saturn, and Saturn processes numerous samskaras from the past that have accumulated in our minds and ask to come out through a long-lasting emotion of sadness. I've told some things that may be interesting to you in order to think what astrology is all about. And what do you really predict when you watch Vimshottari Dasha? I, of course, did not reveal all the nuances here, but I gave you food for thought. I want to finish with what Vimshottari Dasha is all about, how to use it and why in some cases it may not work. If it doesn't work, then you are looking at the wrong place, and you are looking at the wrong thing. When you look at the periods and sub-periods according to Vimshottari Dasha, first you should understand in what emotional state a person is, in what modality, what kind of relationship he builds with reality, and then, when you look at his planets in the chart, you can assume in what situation he will involve himself. Perhaps an example should be given. Let's say you're analyzing the Saturn period. It is about to begin in a person's life. And you can immediately tell him that the main emotion will be such an emotion like sadness, responsibility. Well, this is not our favorite emotion, but nevertheless it is very constructive. And this emotion, or it would be more correct to say this complex of emotions, complexes of samskaras, it is born through 3 nakshatras. 3 nakshatras of Saturn. Pushya, first of all, then Anuradha, then Uttarabhadrapada. And if you know the deities of these nakshatras, if you know the Shakti of these nakshatras, if you can roughly suppose what samskaras appear in the mind of any person in this time, anyone, then you can describe this complex of Saturn, as we call it, and we will be doing this on this course. We will describe each period from the point of view of the nakshatras that form it. Not just that the Saturn period is a period of limitation, and what we already know and understand, but we will look deeper. And what is this complex? Why the limitation, and how exactly in this period you can replace the samskaras of guilt that exist in the mental body of a person with more positive, constructive ones. What situations should be experienced consciously? You can even chant some mantras. This is also one of the ways to replace some samskaras with other samskaras. There are a lot of techniques, but in order to work with this, one must deeply understand this Saturn complex, the complex of these emotions. These are not just emotions of sadness, there is guilt and responsibility, some anxiety, and the issue of purity and purification. And with the Anuradha nakshatra in this regard, there are many interesting things connected, and we will talk about it. And then we can inform the person more comprehensively about things he will experience, and also, at the same time, see if he has these Saturn nakshatras in the chart, and look at Saturn itself and say in which direction the person will move under the influence of this emotion. And this is important. Under the influence of this modality, this state, this complex of Saturn, each person will move into a certain direction depending on where he has this Saturn, in what house, in what sign, what houses Saturn rules. One person will want to go to work. He has Saturn in the 10th house. This is one of the best options, of course. and go, say, to some structure to work. For example, it is Saturn in Capricorn in the 10th house, and there he will experience limitations and realize this whole Saturn complex. Another one will go to destroy a relationship, for example, to experience sadness, depression in relation to the partner, and provoke situations for himself. This will already be shown by a personal individual chart. This is approximately how it works, and when a person says, I began the Jupiter period, I don't feel anything, the Rahu period was better, there are such people. Many comments like this, and the question to them is, do you understand what the Jupiter period is? This means you went to a new modality, you perceive reality in a different way. In general, what you will and will not do during the Jupiter period. How you feel very much depends on this entire Jupiter complex, on how constructive your impressions or samskaras are. Let's say there is a relation to the Punarvasa nakshatra. But have you studied history, law, dharma, and all these things related to renewal, cycles in the past? Do you even have this Punarvasa in your chart? It is just that the person can hang between his new emotional state and the real-life context, and he does not know how to land there. And in a real-life context, especially during the Jupiter period, therefore, many people say, in general, something in my life has changed, everything has become worse. Have you generally worked on Jupiter, for example, during the Rahu-Jupiter period? Or in the previous one, Jupiter sub-period? All this must be remembered and finally grounded. Indeed, a person may face a problem at the beginning of any Mahadasha, ground himself into a situation in a new way because the modality has changed, and this emotion does not find expression in specific deeds. This happens, and therefore we say, oh, a Jupiter period is worse than the Rahu period. During the Rahu period, you were generally in a different state. The ruler of Rahu turned you over, and everything developed very chaotically there. And in Jupiter, indeed, it is possible not to experience the promised positive results, because they must first be brought to the plane of the integral consciousness, and through it, one must go into a certain situation. Here's my analysis of Vimshottari Dasha. I don't want to talk about it for a very long time, because I think you can get tired. And it's better to study all these questions, nuances and subtleties on the course, where we have a lot of practice. Homework is always there. And I also want to record another video to demonstrate a specific period. I choose between the Ketu or the Saturn period, and I plan to record it in such a way to explain what this period is for, how to live with it, and how it can be projected on sub-periods. And now I choose between those two periods and what to record as the next video, as an example of how to analyze the Mahadasha and what characteristics each Mahadasha has, based on which nakshatras the planet rules, and what are the main tasks which arise in this period. I am gravitating towards the Ketu period. You can write in the comments your opinion, what is more interesting to you, what you would like to hear about, but on the course we will analyze everything. And if you want to hear about all the periods, study it professionally, apply it, and then study the transits, the transit calendar, and combine what you see on the Vimshottari Dasha with transit. For example, the same differences between the Saturn period and Sadhisati, because many cannot even theoretically answer this question, what the difference between the Mahadasha of Saturn and the sub-period of Saturn and Sadhisati. But these are actually two different effects associated with consciousness, and we will also discuss this. Thank you very much for your attention. Once again, you can look under this video. There are links to my Instagram where I appear and write something more often. You are welcome to join. There is also a link to a course. on predicting via Vimshottari Dasha and transit, and a link to our school where you can choose any modules that you're interested in. There you can find courses about nakshatras and study them deeply from the point of view of how the thinking process is arranged. When we study nakshatras, we'll look at them deeper, at least deeper than any information that is available anywhere else. Thank you very much for your attention. Please leave your comments, and I see you again very soon in the next video when we will talk about one of the difficult periods in a person's life, either Ketu or Saturn. Goodbye and all the best.